John Brown by W.E.B. DuBois. The Legacy of John Brown, Part 2. Even armed with this morality of the club and every advantage of modern culture, the white races have been unable to possess the earth. Many signs of degeneracy have appeared among them. Their birth rate is falling, their average ability is not increasing, their physical stamina is impaired, and their social condition is not reassuring. Lacking the physical ability to take possession of the world, they are today fencing in America, Australia, and South Africa, and declaring that no dark race shall occupy or develop the land which they themselves are unable to use. And all this on the plea that their stock is threatened with deterioration from without, when in reality its most dangerous threat is deterioration from within. We are, in fact, today repeating in our intercourse between races all the former evils of class distinction within the nation: personal hatred and abuse, mutual injustice, unequal taxation, and rigid caste. Individual nations outgrew these fatal things by breaking down the horizontal barriers between classes. We are bringing them back by seeking to erect vertical barriers between races. Men were told that abolition of compulsory class distinction meant leveling down, degradation, disappearance of culture and genius, and the triumph of the mob. As a matter of fact, it has been the salvation of European civilization. Some deterioration and leveling there was, but it was more than balanced by the discovery of new reservoirs of ability and strength. So today we are told that free racial contact, or social equality as Southern patois has it, means contamination of blood and lowering of ability and culture. It need mean nothing of the sort. Abolition of class distinction did not mean universal intermarriage of stocks, but rather the survival of the fittest by peaceful, personal, and social selection. A selection all the more effective because free democracy and equality of opportunity allow the best to rise to their rightful place. The same is true in racial contact. Vertical race distinctions are even more emphatic hindrances to human evolution than horizontal class distinctions, and their tearing away involves fewer chances of degradation and greater opportunities of human betterment than in case of class lines. On the other hand, persistence in racial distinction spells disaster sooner or later. The earth is growing smaller and more accessible. Race contact will become, in the future, increasingly inevitable, not only in America, Asia, and Africa, but even in Europe. The color line will mean not simply a return to the absurdities of class as exhibited in the 16th and 17th centuries, but even to the caste of ancient days. This, however, the Japanese, the Chinese, the East Indians, and the Negroes are going to resent in just such proportion as they gain the power. And they are gaining the power, and they cannot be kept from gaining more power. The price of repression will then be hypocrisy and slavery and blood. This is the situation today. Has John Brown no message, no legacy, then, to the 20th century? He has, and it is this great word: the cost of liberty is less than the price of repression. The price of repressing the world's darker races is shown in a moral retrogression and an economic waste unparalleled since the age of the African slave trade. What would be the cost of liberty? What would be the cost of giving the great stocks of mankind every reasonable help and incentive to self-development? Opening the avenues of opportunity freely, spreading knowledge, suppressing war and cheating, and treating men and women as equals the world over, whenever and wherever they attain equality. It would cost something. It would cost something in pride and prejudice, for eventually many a white man would be blacking black men's boots. But this cost we may ignore. Its greatest cost would be the new problems of racial intercourse and intermarriage which would come to the front. Freedom and equal opportunity in this respect would inevitably bring some intermarriage of whites and yellows and browns and blacks. This might be a good thing, and it might not be. We do not know. Our belief on the matter may be strong and even frantic, but it has no adequate scientific foundation. If such marriages are proven inadvisable, how could they be stopped? Easily. We associate with cats and cows, but we do not fear intermarriage with them, even though they may be given all freedom of development. So, too, intelligent human beings can be trained to breed intelligently without the degradation of such of their fellows as they may not wish to breed with. In the southern United States, on the contrary, it is assumed that unwise marriages can be stopped only by the degradation of the blacks, the classing of all darker women with prostitutes, the loading of a whole race with every badge of public isolation, degradation, and contempt, and by burning offenders at the stake. Is this civilization? No. The civilized method of preventing ill-advised marriage lies in the training of mankind in the ethics of sex and childbearing. We cannot ensure the survival of the best blood by the public murder and degradation of unworthy suitors, but we can substitute a civilized human selection of husbands and wives which shall ensure the survival of the fittest. Not the methods of the jungle, nor even the careless choices of the drawing room, but the thoughtful selection of the schools and laboratory is the ideal of future marriage. This will cost something in ingenuity, self-control, and toleration, but it will cost less than forcible repression. Not only is the cost of repression today large, it is a continually increasing cost. The procuring of coolie labor, the ruling of India, the exploitation of Africa, the problem of the unemployed, and the curbing of the corporations are a tremendous drain on modern society with no near end in sight. The cost is not merely in wealth, but in social progress and spiritual strength, and it tends ever to explosion, murder, and war. All these things but increase the difficulty of beginning a regime of freedom in human growth and development. They raise the cost of liberty. Not only that, but the very explosions, like the Russo-Japanese War, which bring partial freedom, tend, in the complacent current philosophy, to prove the wisdom of repression. Blood will tell, men say. The fit will survive. Step up the tea kettle, and eventually the steam will burst the iron. And therefore only the steam that bursts is worth the generating. Only organized murder proves the fitness of a people for liberty. This is a fearful and dangerous doctrine. It encourages wrong leadership and perverted ideals at the very time when loftiest and most unselfish striving is called for, as witnessed Japan after her emancipation, or America after the Civil War. Conversely, it leads the shallow and unthinking to brand as demagogue and radical every group leader who in the day of slavery and struggle cries out for freedom. For such reasons it is that the memory of John Brown stands today as a mighty warning to his country. He saw, he felt in his soul the wrong and danger of that most daring and insolent system of human repression known as American slavery. He knew that in 1700 it would have cost something to overthrow slavery and establish liberty, and that by reason of cowardice and blindness the cost in 1800 was vastly larger, but still not unpayable. He felt that by 1900 no human hand could pluck the vampire from the body of the land without doing the nation to death. He said, in 1859, "Now is the accepted time. Now is the day to strike for a free nation. It will cost something, even blood and suffering, but it will not cost as much as waiting." And he was right. Repression bred repression. Serfdom bred slavery, until in 1861 the South was farther from freedom than in 1800. The Edict of 1863 was the first step in emancipation, and its cost in blood and treasure was staggering. But that was not all. It was only a first step. There were other bills to pay, of material reconstruction, social regeneration, mental training, and moral uplift. These the nation started to meet in the 15th Amendment, the Freedmen's Bureau, the crusade of school teachers, and the Civil Rights Bill. But the effort was great, and the determination of the South to pay no single cent or deed for past error, save by force, led in the Revolution of 1876 to the triumph of reaction. Reaction meant and means a policy of state, society, and individual whereby no American of Negro blood shall ever come into the full freedom of modern culture. In the carrying out of this program by certain groups and sections, no pains have been spared, no expenditure of money, ingenuity, physical or moral strength. The building of barriers around these black men has been pushed with an energy so desperate and unflagging that it has seriously checked the great outpouring of benevolence and sympathy that greeted the freedmen in 1863. It has come so swathed and gowned in graciousness as to disarm philanthropy and chill enthusiasm. It has used double-tongued argument with deadly effect. Has the Negro advanced? Beware his further strides. Has the Negro retrograded? It is his fate. Why seek to help him? Thus has the spirit of repression gained attention, complacent acquiescence, and even cooperation. To be sure, there still stand staunch souls who cannot yet believe the doctrine of human repression, and who pour out their wealth for Negro training and freedom in the face of the common cry. But the majority of Americans seem to have forgotten the foundation principles of their government and the recklessly destructive effect of the blows meant to bind and tether their fellows. We have come to see a day here in America when one citizen can deprive another of his vote at his discretion, can restrict the education of his neighbor's children as he sees fit, can with impunity load his neighbor with public insult on the king's highway, can deprive him of his property without due process of law, can deny him the right of trial by his peers, or of any trial whatsoever, if he can get a large enough group of men to join him, can refuse to protect or safeguard the integrity of the family of some men whom he dislikes. Finally, can not only close the door of opportunity in commercial and social lines in a fully competent neighbor's face, but can actually count on the national and state governments to help and make effective this discrimination. Such a state of affairs is not simply disgraceful, it is deeply and increasingly dangerous. Not only does the whole nation feel already the loosening of joints which these vicious blows on human liberty have caused, lynching, lawlessness, lying and stealing, bribery, and divorce, but it can look for darker deeds to come. And this is not merely because of the positive harm of this upbuilding of barriers, but above all because within these bursting barriers are men. Human forces which no human hand can hold. It is human force and aspiration and endeavor which are moving there amid the creaking of timbers and the writhing of souls. It is human force that has already done in a generation the work of many centuries. It has saved over $500 million in property, bought and paid for land and estate half the size of all England, and put homes thereon as good and as pure as the homes of any corresponding economic class the world around. It has crowded eager children through a wretched and half-furnished school system, until, from an illiteracy of 70%, 2/3 of the living adults can read and write. These proscribed millions have 50,000 professional men, 200,000 men in trade and transportation, 275,000 artisans and mechanics, 1,250,000 servants, and 2,000,000 farmers working with the nation to earn its daily bread. These farmers raise yearly, on their own and hired farms, over 4,000,000 bales of cotton, 25,000,000 pounds of rice, 10,000,000 bushels of potatoes, 90,000,000 pounds of tobacco, and 100,000,000 bushels of corn, besides that for which they labor on the farms of others. They have given America music, inspired art and literature, made its bread, dug its ditches, fought its battles, and suffered in its misfortunes. the great mass of these men is becoming daily more thoroughly organized, more deeply self-critical, more conscious of its power. Threatened though it has been, naturally, as a proletariat, with degeneration and disease, it is today reducing its death rate and beginning organized rescue of its delinquents and defectives. The mass can still today be called ignorant, poor, and but moderately efficient, but it is daily growing better trained, richer, and more intelligent. And as it grows, it is sensing more and more the vantage ground which it holds as a defender of the right of the freedom of human development for black men in the midst of a center of modern culture. It sees its brothers in yellow, black, and brown held physically at arm's length from civilization, lest they become civilized and less liable to conquest and exploitation. It sees the world-wide effort to build an aristocracy of races and nations on a foundation of darker, half-enslaved, and tributary peoples. It knows that the last great battle of the West is to vindicate the right of any man of any nation, race, or color to share in the world's goods and thoughts and efforts to the extent of his effort and ability. Thus, today, the Negro American faces his destiny and doggedly strives to realize it. He has his tempters and temptations. There are ever those about him whispering, "You are nobody. Why strive to be somebody? The odds are overwhelming against you. Wealth, tradition, learning, and guns. Be reasonable. Accept the dole of charity and the cant of missionaries, and sink contentedly to your place as humble servants and helpers of the white world." If this has not been effective, threats have been used. If you continue to complain, we will withdraw all aid, boycott your labor, cease to help support your schools, and let you die and disappear from the land in ignorance, crime, and disease. Still, the black man has pushed on, has continued to protest, has refused to die out and disappear, and today stands as physically the most virile element in America, intellectually among the most promising, and morally the most tremendous and insistent of the social problems of the New World. Not even the silence of his friends, or of those who ought to be the friends of struggling humanity, has silenced him. Not even the wealth of modern Golconda has induced him to believe that life without liberty is worth living. On the other side, heart-searching is in order. It is not well within this land of ours. Poverty is certainly not growing less. Wealth is being wantonly wasted. Business honesty is far too rare. Family integrity is threatened. Bribery is poisoning our public life. Theft is honeycombing our private business, and voting is largely unintelligent. Not that these evils are unopposed. There are brave men and women striving for social betterment, for the curbing of the vicious power of wealth, for the uplift of women and the downfall of thieves. But their battle is hard, and how much harder because of the race problem, because of the calloused conscience of caste, the peonage of black labor hands, the insulting of black women, and the stealing of black votes. How far are business dishonesty and civic degradation in America the direct result of racial prejudice? Well do I know that many persons defend their treatment of undeveloped peoples on the highest grounds. They say, as Jefferson Davis intimated, that liberty is for the full grown, not for children. It was during Senator Mason's inquisition after the hanging of John Brown, whereby the Southern leader hoped to entrap the abolitionists. Joshua R. Giddings, keen, impetuous, and fiery, was on the rack. Senator Davis, pale, sallow, and imperturbable, with all the aristocratic poise and dignity built on the unpaid toil of 2 centuries of slaves, said: "Did you, in inculcating by popular lectures the doctrine of a law higher than that of the social compact, make your application exclusively to negro slaves, or did you also include minors, convicts, and lunatics, who might be restrained of their liberty by the laws of the land?" Mr. Giddings smiled. "Permit me," he said, "with all due deference, to suggest, so that I may understand you, Do you intend to inquire whether those lectures would indicate whether your slaves of the slave States had a right, at all times, to their liberty?" "I will put the question in that form, if you like it," answered Davis; and then Giddings flashed: "My lectures in all instances would indicate the right of every human soul in the enjoyment of reason, while he is charged with no crime or offence, to maintain his life, his liberty, the pursuit of his own happiness; that this has reference to the enslaved of all the States, as much as it had reference to our own people while enslaved by the Algerines in Africa." But Mr. Davis suavely pressed his point. "Then the next question is, whether the same right was asserted for minors and apprentices, being men in good reason, yet restrained of their liberty by the laws of the land?" Giddings replied: "I will answer at once that the proposition or comparison is conflicting with the dictates of truth. The minor is, from the law of nature, under the restraints of parental affection, for the purposes of nurture, of education, of preparing him to secure and maintain the very rights to which I refer." This debate is not yet closed. It was not closed by the Civil War. Men still maintain that East Indians and Africans and others ought to be under the restraint and benevolent tutelage of stronger and wiser nations for their own benefit. Well and good. Is the tutelage really benevolent? Then it is training in liberty. Is it training in slavery? Then it is not benevolent. Liberty trains for liberty. Responsibility is the first step in responsibility. Even the restraints imposed in the training of men and children are restraints that will, in the end, make greater freedom possible. Is the benevolent expansion of today of such a character? Is England trying to see how soon and how effectively the Indians can be trained for self government? Or is she willing to exploit them just so long as they can be cajoled or quieted into submission? Is Germany trying to train her Africans to modern citizenship, or to modern work without complaint? Is the South trying to make the negroes responsible, self reliant freemen of a republic, or the dumb driven cattle of a great industrial machine? No sooner is the question put this way than the defenders of modern caste retire behind a more defensible breastwork. They say, yes, we exploit nations for our own advantage purposely, even at times brutally. But only in that way can the high efficiency of the modern industrial process be maintained, and in the long run it benefits the oppressed even more than the oppressor. This doctrine is as widespread as it is false and mischievous. It is true that the bribe of greed will artificially hasten economic development, but it does so at fearful cost, as America itself can testify. We have here a wonderful industrial machine, but a machine quickly rather than carefully built, formed of forcing rather than of growth, involving sinful and unnecessary expense. Better smaller production and more equitable distribution. Better fewer miles of railway and more honor, truth, and liberty. Better fewer millionaires and more contentment. So it is the world over, where force and fraud and graft have extorted rich reward from writhing millions. Moreover, it is historically unprovable that the advance of undeveloped peoples has been helped by wholesale exploitation at the hands of their richer, stronger, and more unscrupulous neighbors. This idea is a legend of the long exploded doctrine of inevitable economic harmonies in all business life. True it is that adversity and difficulties make for character, but the real and inevitable difficulties of life are numerous enough for genuine development without the aid of artificial hindrances. The inherent and natural difficulties of raising a people from ignorant, unmoral slavishness to self-reliant modern manhood are great enough for purposes of character building without the aid of murder, theft, caste, and degradation. Not because of, but in spite of these latter hindrances, has the Negro American pressed forward. This, then, is the truth. The cost of liberty is less than the price of repression, even though that cost be blood. Freedom of development and equality of opportunity is the demand of Darwinism, and this calls for the abolition of hard and fast lines between races, just as it called for the breaking down of barriers between classes. Only in this way can the best in humanity be discovered and conserved, and only thus can mankind live in peace and progress. The present attempt to force all whites above all darker peoples is a sure method of human degeneration. The cost of liberty is thus a decreasing cost, while the cost of repression ever tends to increase to the danger point of war and revolution. Revolution is not a test of capacity; it is always a loss and a lowering of ideals. John Brown taught us that the cheapest price to pay for liberty is its cost today. The building of barriers against the advance of Negro Americans hinders, but in the end cannot altogether stop their progress. The excuse of benevolent tutelage cannot be urged, for that tutelage is not benevolent that does not prepare for free, responsible manhood. Nor can the efficiency of greed as an economic developer be proven. It may hasten development, but it does so at the expense of solidity of structure, smoothness of motion, and real efficiency. Nor does selfish exploitation help the undeveloped; rather it hinders and weakens them. It is now full 50 years since this white-haired old man lay weltering in the blood which he spilled for broken and despised humanity. Let the nation which he loved, and the South to which he spoke, reverently listen again today to those words, as prophetic now as then. You had better, all you people of the South, prepare yourselves for a settlement of this question. It must come up for settlement sooner than you are prepared for it, and the sooner you commence that preparation the better for you. You may dispose of me very easily. I am nearly disposed of now. But this question is still to be settled. This Negro question, I mean. The end of that is not yet. End of section 20. End of John Brown by W.E.B. DuBois.